Courtney Vale, the glamorous OnlyFans model, and Daniel Ross, her ambitious entrepreneur boyfriend, seemed like the perfect couple online until one bloody night inside their Miami high-rise ended with Daniel dead and Courtney in handcuffs. What unfolded behind their luxury doors revealed a chilling tale of obsession, control, and a relationship spiraling toward tragedy. The night that would later dominate headlines began like any other in the city of Miami. The luxury towers glittered against the waterfront, symbols of wealth and aspiration. Yet inside one of those pristine apartments, tragedy was unfolding. When the first responders arrived, they were greeted by silence broken only by the faint hum of an air conditioner and the smell of iron in the air. On the cold marble floor lay a young man, his shirt stained dark with blood, his life slipping away from a deep wound in his chest. Just a few feet away stood his girlfriend, her body trembling, her clothes and hands covered in red. She was an OnlyFans model, known online for her polished beauty and lavish lifestyle. But in that moment, she looked less like an icon and more like the central figure of a nightmare. The officers moved quickly to secure the scene, but their eyes were drawn to her. She claimed it was an act of self-defense, her voice steady despite the chaos, yet the details around her cast doubt almost immediately. The knife, a sleek kitchen blade, lay discarded near the victim. The furniture was in disarray, cushions overturned, and streaks of blood marked the trail of a struggle. Still, the woman bore no serious injuries, no bruises or cuts to match her story. Her face carried a strange mix of fear and composure, as though she had already prepared for the moment she would be questioned. Outside the apartment, neighbors had gathered in hushed clusters. Some whispered that they had heard shouting earlier, the kind of argument that shook the walls despite expensive soundproofing. Others described a scream, sharp and haunting, echoing down the hallway just before the police arrived. For those who had occasionally glimpsed the couple in the lobby or the elevators, the bloody scene was both shocking and strangely unsurprising. Rumors had long swirled that their picture-perfect relationship, paraded across social media, was filled with volatility behind closed doors. News spread quickly, faster than the investigators could process the evidence. Within hours, photographs of the influencer in handcuffs flooded the internet, sparking debates and dividing opinions. To her fans, it was unthinkable that she could be capable of such violence. To her critics, it was the unraveling of an image too carefully built to last. For detectives, though, the question was not whether something dark had been hiding beneath the surface, it was how long it had been waiting to erupt. In the days following the stabbing, investigators began to untangle the couple's shared history. Determined to understand how a relationship that seemed so enviable online had descended into bloodshed. The victim was remembered as a hardworking entrepreneur, someone who had built his reputation on persistence and charm. Friends described him as ambitious yet grounded, a man who cared deeply about his family and his future. He had been the type to push through obstacles, always looking for the next opportunity to grow. His sudden and violent death left many struggling to comprehend how the life of someone so disciplined could end in such chaos. The woman at the center of the storm, however, was no stranger to attention. Known to thousands of followers as a glamorous OnlyFans model, she had carefully crafted her image as one of luxury and allure. Her page displayed vacations to tropical islands, champagne-filled nights at exclusive clubs, and an endless collection of designer outfits. She was adored, envied, and criticized in equal measure, but her success in monetizing her lifestyle was undeniable. Beneath the surface, though, those closest to her saw a personality far less stable than the images suggested. Detectives interviewed friends and acquaintances who recounted troubling stories of her temper. One remembered a heated argument during a trip abroad, where she had hurled a glass across the room in fury. Another recalled seeing her shove her boyfriend at a crowded nightclub, her voice raised in threats. These accounts painted a picture of volatility, where small disagreements often escalated into frightening confrontations. Still, others insisted that she could be charming and affectionate, capable of convincing those around her that her outbursts were nothing more than moments of passion. Prosecutors took careful note of this duality. On one hand, she was a rising online star whose beauty and charisma masked the fractures beneath the surface. On the other, she was a woman capable of sudden and unpredictable rage, leaving those around her walking on eggshells. To investigators, the stabbing no longer appeared as a split-second act of survival but the climax of a toxic relationship that had spiraled far beyond repair. The narrative of self-defense began to unravel, replaced by questions of intent, control, and whether the model's obsession with maintaining power had ultimately driven her to a fatal act of violence. The deeper detectives dug into the couple's private world, the more disturbing the trail became. Digital forensics quickly turned the case from a mystery into a puzzle filled with alarming clues. Investigators obtained security footage from the luxury apartment building, and what it revealed raised more questions than answers. Hours before the stabbing, the model was seen pacing the hallway outside her unit, her hair disheveled and her hands clutching her phone tightly. At one point, she leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, her clothes marked with faint red stains that could not be easily explained. She eventually returned to the apartment, but her demeanor appeared tense, almost as if she were bracing herself for what was about to happen. When detectives combed through the victim's phone, they uncovered a series of heated arguments that spanned months. Dozens of messages showed escalating tension, with accusations of infidelity, threats of breaking up, and desperate pleas for reconciliation. In one chilling exchange, she had written that she would never let him walk away. To prosecutors, this was more than a lover's quarrel, it was a warning of what was to come. The digital trail extended to her own accounts as well. Posts from her private subscription platform showed her hinting at being misunderstood, laughing off comments about her temper, and even making cryptic remarks about what happens when people cross her. Still, the defense began crafting a counter-narrative. They painted her as a woman pushed to her limits by a controlling partner, someone who endured manipulation and verbal abuse before finally snapping. They emphasized that the couple's toxic bond was not one-sided, arguing that the boyfriend, too, had played a role in fueling the endless cycle of fights and reconciliation. To them, the stabbing was a tragic act of desperation, not a calculated strike. Meanwhile, detectives focused on the forensic evidence. Blood spatter patterns suggested the attack happened suddenly, in the center of the living room, not in the chaotic scuffle the model described. The wound was deep and angled with precision, consistent with forceful intent rather than a frantic defensive move. Each piece of evidence slowly chipped away at the image she tried to present. What had first appeared to be a night of passion gone wrong was now shaping into a calculated act, leaving investigators to determine whether obsession and jealousy had finally reached a deadly breaking point. By the time the case reached trial, the story had transformed into a national spectacle. Reporters filled the courthouse steps each morning, cameras flashing as the defendant arrived in carefully chosen outfits, no longer the glamorous influencer seen on social media, but a figure fighting for her freedom. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Every seat occupied by journalists, curious locals, and family members desperate for answers. The prosecution wasted no time setting the tone, projecting images of the blood-soaked apartment onto large screens for the jury. The photos showed the brutality in stark detail, the deep crimson stains on the floor, the overturned furniture, and the lifeless body of the victim. The jury watched in silence, some visibly shaken, as the state argued that no act of self-defense could explain such violence. Prosecutors called on forensic experts who described how the single stab wound had been delivered with precision and force. According to their testimony, the angle and depth suggested intent rather than panic, pointing to a deliberate strike. Neighbors from the luxury building also testified, recounting the frequent arguments they overheard, including the chilling threats shouted just days before the killing. One resident described hearing the model's voice rise in rage, followed by her boyfriend's attempts to calm her down. To the prosecution, this pattern of behavior proved that the murder was the inevitable end of a toxic cycle. The defense countered by painting a very different picture. Their strategy was to reframe the narrative, turning the spotlight onto the victim. They introduced messages that appeared to show him belittling her, moments where his words cut deep and painted him as controlling. They argued that behind closed doors, he had been far from the charming figure his friends described. The defense leaned heavily on the idea that the model was a woman trapped in a dangerous relationship, that her glamorous online life was nothing more than a mask to hide her suffering. Her act of violence, they claimed, was not born from jealousy or rage but from fear. Each day of testimony pulled the public deeper into the contradictions. Was she a cold-blooded killer who had snapped under the weight of her own obsession? Or was she the latest victim of a relationship poisoned by hidden abuse? The courtroom became a stage where both sides fought not only for a verdict but for control of the story itself, leaving the jury to sort through a tangle of evidence, emotion, and unanswered questions. As the trial drew to its conclusion, the weight of every detail lingered in the minds of the jury. Weeks of testimony had revealed two drastically different portraits of the same woman, one a glamorous influencer whose life revolved around attention and control, the other, a young woman allegedly trapped in a cycle of manipulation, forced into violence by fear. Both narratives carried pieces of truth, yet only one could decide her fate. The prosecution's closing argument focused on the brutality of the act, reminding jurors that the victim had been stabbed with deliberate force and that the digital evidence showed months of threats and obsession. They argued that her actions were not the result of sudden panic but of a pattern long in the making. The defense, in turn, leaned on her tears, her shaky voice as she took the stand, and the scars of a relationship that, they claimed, left her desperate and cornered. The courtroom was packed when the jury retreated to deliberate. Hours turned into a day, and the public waited with growing anticipation. News outlets dissected every possible outcome, while social media erupted with debates. Supporters of the model insisted she was being demonized for her career and online persona, while others believed the evidence against her was too strong to ignore. Her fate had become more than a private matter, it was a cultural flashpoint, exposing the divide between perception and reality in an age ruled by digital image. When the jury finally returned, silence blanketed the courtroom. The defendant sat rigid, her eyes fixed forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The foreperson stood and delivered the verdict, each word echoing across the chamber. Gasps filled the air as the decision was announced, sealing the conclusion of a case that had captivated the nation. Whether guilty or not guilty, the ruling could not undo the life that had been lost or erase the haunting image of blood staining the luxury apartment floor. Outside, reporters swarmed, their voices overlapping as cameras captured the aftermath. For some, the verdict was justice served. For others, it was a tragic misunderstanding of a toxic relationship's complexities. Regardless of the outcome, the story was already etched into memory, a stark reminder that behind carefully curated images and glamorous posts can lie turmoil, obsession, and violence. The influencer's legacy would no longer be measured in followers or fame but in the shadow of a brutal night that ended in tragedy.